Stephen Crabb there. Well, I'm joined now to chew over some of those points by Lynette Parrott, who speaks for Europe for the Lib Dems in Wales, and Sam Gould from UKIP. Thank you both very much for coming in.
You're welcome.
This morning. Lynette Parrott, just to start off with you, if I may. I mean, these changes, these proposals that David Cameron wants to see to limit the in-work benefits for EU migrants for 4 years from the point where they reach here. What does that make to you? Does that sort of make the EU a less attractive sort of policy now for you?
Not at all. I think that regardless of the package of changes that David Cameron is hoping to achieve on a pragmatic basis, the long-term picture for Europe is one of partnership with our nations. It's about making sure that we have, looking to the long term, the economic opportunities to help collaborate together across Europe to fight against the threat of jobs being lost to the Far East. It's about tackling climate change, again, over the long term. It's about those international relationships that we've developed as a partnership of nations for a long period of time, and that have helped to bring us security and stability.
Well, OK, Sam Gould, I mean, I don't think for a second what David Cameron achieves will sway either of you two, but do you think for the British voters, maybe, if he can come back and say he's got a good deal on for example, benefits here, that might sway some of the sort of uncertain voters?
I think that voters will actually see through the smoke and mirrors that's been created by David Cameron. I don't think in any way he's going to get a good deal. And that, you just look at this emergency brake on migration. Well, all it's doing is basically asking, allowing him to go back to Brussels and actually request for us to then have another brake on migration. It's not giving him any real power. The fact that he has to go around Europe and around the different states begging for his own right to actually change his own laws is not a leader of an independent nation.
Lynette Parrott, what do you think of this idea that he wants the emergency brake, if he gets it, to come into place the day after a referendum, and then it'll be in place, he wants to say, for 7 years while they work on a more permanent fixture? Doesn't that undermine one of the key sort of plus points for the Remain side, which is that certainty that you know what you'll get after a vote to remain in the EU, but actually we don't really, do we? Because it'll just be tinkering again if the UK remains.
Not at all. Over a period of time, obviously, as the challenges facing Europe change, there will be changes that are negotiated between the European states. But of course, those are decisions for the European Parliament and our elected heads of states as part of the Council of Europe too. There are inevitably going to be different crises that approach Europe, and we will need to take those into account and deal with them as they arise. But what I'm talking about is those long-term challenges that remain constant: climate change, making sure that we are economically resilient and that we can brave the swings and fortunes of the global market, and also things along the lines like making sure that we've got research and development in our universities, investment going there, and making sure as well that we've got, through things like the Common Agricultural Policy, a stable food base and farms that are able to survive without it.
I guess that's a good point, isn't it? For the Remain side, you can list off a whole lot of attractive things that EU brings. From the Leave side, there is a danger that actually it's an awful lot of uncertainty when you're looking at things, for example, like trade and so on. Is that a concern for the Leave side? Not
at all. I think there's actually more uncertainty if we remain. You just look at the case of Welsh Steel, for example, and the uncertainty that's been there. In fact, we've lost hundreds of jobs recently as a result of the EU doing absolutely nothing. And the fact is, if when we get our own control once again over the UK markets, we can then ensure that we can actually protect British jobs first.
OK, that's the steel industry, but there are an awful lot of other issues surrounding it, whereby trade, for example, with the European Union, a huge amount of exports from the UK out to the EU countries, and you'd have to sort of renegotiate all those different factors without knowing exactly what the end point would be.
Look, the EU will negotiate and offer a free trade deal, I'm sure, within 24 hours of us leaving.
You're sure that's not cast iron? I'm sorry, I've got to pick you up there. That's not cast iron, is it? That's your
Under World Trade Organisation rules, that would have to remain. Furthermore, as well, we'll regain our seat on the World Trade Organisation, therefore enable enabling us to make our own trade arrangements. The fact is that the EU hasn't made trade arrangements with the United States of America or China, some of the biggest markets in the world. We'll be able to do that as an independent nation. Furthermore, we import billions of pounds worth of products from the EU. We import more than we actually export to it. It's in their interest to ensure that we have a free trade arrangement with them.
There we are. It makes the freedom far easier for trade.
Forgive me, but that's absolute nonsense. Of course, the European Union at the moment are undergoing those negotiations over a union with America to free up trade. But it's an absolute nonsense. 44% of Britain's trade goes to European nations. Those emerging, developing countries, that's less than 10%, about 8% according to latest figures. It would be absolutely devastating to the British economy and to Wales in particular if people who have come and invested in Wales, those inward investors that we've brought here over generations, decided all of a sudden that they would have to leave because the reason they came here is it was an entry point to the European market. The European market is 500 million consumers and £10 trillion in value. I'm sorry, but the UK market as an entry point is nowhere near as attractive.
And I guess on a separate issue, but to pick up on what Stephen Crabb was saying in the interview there, does it need to be a different emphasis in Wales when you consider the billions of pounds over the last 10 years or so that have come from EU structural Objective 1 funds? Now, I've heard the argument before, well, it's British money, we'll just give it to Wales anyway. But again, that's not a guarantee, that's an uncertainty.
Well, there's an uncertainty. The fact that when the European Union is growing is the fact that when Turkey joins the European Union, you know, Stephen Crabb is more than aware that the funding coming to Wales will then also decrease. There's far more certainty when we leave the EU and we'll have to take control of our funds. Just as was mentioned as well in terms of trade negotiations, the Transatlantic Trade Initiative Partnership, TTIP, being negotiated in secret by the European Commission in regards to a trade agreement with the United States, puts many of our things here in Wales at risk. It puts the NHS at risk and could lead to privatisation of the NHS, which we want to stop.
Actually, that's not true. It's your policy in the UK as UKIP to scrap the NHS, so I'm afraid that that's not really a very...
That is completely not the case.
It's an interesting point that we'll return to again over a few months, but thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
You can get all the latest